everyone. Today we're going to talk about ratios and proportions, and today we're also going to move into the concept of rate and unit rate. So we are moving to Common Core Standard 2 so that we can understand the concept of a unit rate associated with the ratio of A to B when B does not equal 0. So that's a lot of interesting language, but really we're looking at things that have a denominator of 1. So our objective is that students will demonstrate understanding of a unit rate within the context of a ratio. So we're going to identify and explain real-world unit rate examples. A ratio is different from a unit rate because a ratio is a comparison between two or more numbers, and a rate is a ratio where the two measurements are related to each other but are in different units. So the word rate is used rather than ratio. So a unit is the description of the quantity, right? It's like inches, feet. You can have a certain number of apples or cows, whatever you're looking at. Anytime you have a number, it's usually described by a unit. So if we have two numbers of different units, we want to use a rate rather than a ratio. This allows us to write our denominator as a 1. So for example, if we're looking at miles per hour or meters per second, or for example, with our basketball assignment in class, taking a number of shots per game, all those things have a 1 in our denominator because they're made up of two different units. A real-world rate example is that when we're driving, we travel in miles per hour. So my speedometer on my dashboard of my car gives me the speed in miles per hour. For example, if I traveled to New York City from Connecticut, that's approximately 100 miles, and it would take me about 2 hours. So my rate would be how many miles would it take me per hour or in 1 hour. So I look at my ratio as miles over hours being equal to 100 to 2, right? I traveled 100 miles in about 2 hours. But I don't want that 2 in the denominator. I want a 1 because I want a rate. My units are different and I need to describe this ratio as a rate. So in order to get rid of that 2, I need to divide by 2 to equal 1. And whatever I do to my denominator, I do to my numerator. So I divide my 100 by 2 to equal 50. So instead of saying I traveled 100 miles and it took me 2 hours, I can say I traveled 50 miles per hour. Another example would be when you are swimming. A lot of competitive swimmers measure their speed in meters per second. So when I look at meters per second, my clock or my timer, my stopwatch that I'm using, will most likely count my seconds. So you could potentially travel 86 meters in 43 seconds. That's a pretty good swimming speed. So when that happens, I have a 43 in my denominator, but I only want there to be a 1. So I divide by 43 in both my denominator and my numerator. So instead of saying I traveled 86 meters in 43 seconds, I can say that I traveled 2 meters per second. Using a rate instead of a ratio really simplifies the relationship between those two numbers so that I can say it more straightforward. Most people understand a unit rate much better than a ratio. So there you have it. We had a quick ratio review. A ratio is just a comparison of two numbers. We talked about a rate. A rate is a ratio with a 1 in the denominator. That is two numbers of two different units compared. So that could be something like miles per hour or meters per second. And unit rates are ratios with just a denominator of 1.